And you're live.
Okay, welcome to House Education. This is Tuesday, March 31st, 3 o'clock. We have the excellent presence of two members of the House Human Services Committee to talk to us about the language that came over from them regarding pre-K. And it's an opportunity for us to ask questions, put it into context, why they made the decisions that they did. I think it's probably fair to say that there were two concerns that bubbled up during the presentation this morning. One of the big ones is the part down a few pages that says that school districts will be required to essentially provide pre-K if there are not slots available in their area. And then the use of, I think there was some concern about provisional licenses and sort of the inability of a school district to be able to have the same level of supervision of somebody on a provisional license in a private setting. But why don't you go ahead and tell us what you want us to know, and then maybe we can get into some of those more specifics.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. Teresa Wood, Chair of House Human Services.
Ray Garofano, Vice Chair of House Human Services.
Thanks for the opportunity to spend a few minutes with you. We spent quite a bit of time taking quite a bit of testimony on pre-K over the last several weeks. We essentially, and I think you all have copies of the cover memo that I sent with the language. So I don't need to repeat it all, but one of the things that we wanted to assure, and this came directly out of our work with Act 76 and the expansion of child care financial assistance program and eligibility and reimbursement. And we learned during that process that universal pre-K, which is tied up with early education in our child care centers, is not universal at all. The only thing that is really required is that if a family or guardian can find pre-K, that the state is obligated to pay for 10 hours of that a week. That's really the only thing that exists. And so we, in Act 76, set up a pre-K implementation committee that met for many months and came back with several recommendations that essentially looked at wanting to expand the number of hours for 4-year-olds. And that theme has been consistent. The Secretary of Education's and governor's proposal expands hours for pre-K. And the work of Building Bright Futures in their work with AOE, with DCF, also recommends expansion of hours for 4-year-olds. At the same time, they all recommend the continuation of services at the current level for 3-year-olds. And we did start off our work thinking about 3-year-olds, about essentially having 3-year-olds move totally into the child care financial assistance program. Not all of them would be eligible for that, even though our income levels are, quite high for middle income families at this point in time. But for some, that was a step backwards, even though Vermont is an outlier in a positive sense, if you will, for 3-year-olds. If you look at the national map from near, you can see Vermont is, the only colored state that's providing access for 3-year-olds. Now, some other states are looking at it, but we're really kind of the one that provides it at this point in time. So we're very conscious of not trying to have unintended consequences for the things that were working well in the system. All but one state in the country where pre-K is offered do it in a mixed delivery system like Vermont does. About 50% of the kids, it's almost exactly 50% now, get their pre-K education in public schools, and about 50% get it in private pre-K. One of the main goals of our committee was to increase access, not to decrease access, because we are really trying to make universal pre-K, in fact, true to its name and have it be universal access for any family that wants it for their for their children. Doing so, however, requires somebody to be in charge of that, somebody to have a responsibility for that. And right now, no one has a responsibility for it. So if you are lucky enough to find pre-K, and you can see from the reports that we received, we're actually gaining a lot more data than we had previously, which is a good thing. AOE, DCF, and Building Bright Futures are all working together, and their data people are all working together, and that is a big step forward in trying to understand the landscape out there. So, for instance, we know in the Northeast Kingdom, only 11% of the children eligible for pre-K are actually receiving pre-K in the Northeast Kingdom. However, in the Northwest Kingdom, if you want to say, the Franklin Grand Isle areas where the least amount of providers are in that part of the state. We wanted to, one, do no harm to the service system as it's working right now. Children are arriving at kindergarten ready to learn, a very high percentage at, I think that means the 91% of 4-year-olds meet, 91% of 4-year-olds meet literacy expectations, and 85% of children are arriving in kindergarten ready to learn. Of course, we were only looking to increase those positive outcomes and not looking to have an impact on things that might be more negatively received. So first was about access, and we felt it important that somebody has responsibility for ensuring the availability, whether through direct provision or in coordination or under contract with local private providers or some combination, or through another, depending upon what all ends up here happening in terms of school districts, could be other public school districts as well. So we did. We said that this is education. This is money that is coming from the education fund. And the school districts have the local responsibility, like they do for everybody else in the education system, for assuring that educational opportunity is available for children who are eligible. And pre-K children are no different. And yet somehow we are treating them differently. And so that was a basic premise that we entered into our deliberations about ensuring access and having a locus of responsibility for access. Another key item was, this was news for our committee. We had heard, oftentimes people refer to there not being comparable quality in private pre-K from public pre-K. I don't think the outcomes are showing that, because we're seeing comparable outcomes regardless of where you get that education. However, those are things that have been talked about around the building by various folks at various times. And it was news to our committee when we learned that the actual pre-K statute doesn't require a licensed teacher to be in the classroom, either in the public system or in the private system. However, we know that, collective bargaining agreements and other provisions, all schools, if you're offering pre-K, have a licensed teacher in them. We felt it was time to require licensed teachers in private pre-K. And we looked at some of the data. We know that through Act 76, there has been a lot of investment in education of professionals and the opportunity to seek advancement. And there's another whole bill that has just recently come over from the Senate around EC Early Childhood Educators and the Office of Professional Regulation. So we wanted to be clear and that we believe that the time has come to require private preschool providers to have a licensed preschool teacher in the classroom, not just available to the classroom, but in the classroom, in each classroom. Obviously, in order to do that, there is discrepancy between what private providers receive and what school districts typically are able to include in their budgets. And you all know better how the weighting system works than I do, but it's about double. Anyways, there's a differential of about double between what public school systems are able to access for pre-K and what private providers are able to access for pre-K. So we wanted to equalize that in order for them to be able to pay licensed teachers to be in the classroom. However, we recognize that there would be an on-ramp that would be necessary in order to achieve that. And so we suggested 7 years in this bill as an on-ramp for private providers to be able to earn their credentials. I know there was some concern about home-based providers, home-based pre-K providers. Ray has some data about that. So we originally were thinking about whether to exclude them and have them at a different payment rate. And based upon the data, which Ray, if you want to share, that would be good. We decided not to do that.
Yes, so the DCF provided this data around the family childcare home programs that are currently UPK partners. So there's currently 35 family childcare programs statewide that are UPK partners, and 20 already are operated by AOE licensed individuals. So for those folks, they don't need to do anything different. They're already a licensed professional, a licensed teacher, and operating that home. And then the other 15, we have their credentials, and looks, from the data that DCF provided, 1 has a master's, 2 have bachelors, 6 have associates. So all of them are on their way and have some qualifications that would require them, that are required for the teacher licensure. So we feel that based on this data and the on-ramp that we provided for those private providers to obtain those qualifications, it will be in really good shape as far as what people already have for qualifications and credentials. So we felt like that was a fair assessment of saying 7 years should give you enough time, that part of the field enough time to get the qualifications and the credentials needed to become licensed.
And I know there's been some discussion this morning about the school district responsibility. And, we did receive testimony. I don't know how to pronounce Sue's last name. Thank you. On behalf of the principal superintendents and school boards. They specifically said that they felt school districts should be responsible and the responsible entities if somebody was going to be made responsible. They had concerns about liability, and we wanted to assure them that we were not charging them with liability, that was still going to be the responsibility of state regulators. So that would not fall onto a school district in terms of what our recommendations were. I think any other points that you want to add?
The only other thing I wanted to offer as far as the capability of private providers being able to get the qualifications that they need is, as Teresa or Chair Wood mentioned, there are a lot of resources available, and there is very specific criteria for a private provider to become UPK qualified, and that's administered by both the Agency of Education and the Child Development Division. And in Act 76, there's a lot of investments and incentives for professionals not only to get their credentials and professional development, but also to increase their quality, which is one of the standards that need to be met. So there's a lot of supports and specific incentives for private programs to become UPK qualified, which has been a concerted effort part of Act 76, we wanted to make sure that childcare programs had incentives to increase their quality and offer high quality care. So, which kind of goes hand in hand with what's becoming UPK pre-qualifying.
So I think, again, as I said at the beginning, there are probably two issues within this that are making folks a little nervous. And for me, it is the language that says that school districts are, if there is no capacity, they are responsible for providing pre-K.
Or arranging for it.
Or range,
Yeah.
yeah.
But if none exists, if no capacity is, you talk about the Northeast Kingdom, where there just really aren't private providers.
Actually, there are. That was one of the surprising pieces of data that I don't have it right here in front of me. They actually rank higher than Franklin and Grand Isle County in terms of access from private providers.
I think say, however,
Yeah,
ultimately, I mean, I can pick on my own district where we have lots of private providers, but there's still more demand than exists. And so what this says is, therefore, it is the public school's responsibility to provide that pre-K service. We don't know how education is going to be paid for when that part kicks in, and so for me, a little bit of it. My concern is that it's a little bit of the cart before the horse, in that we're requiring it, but we don't really have spelled out how it's going to be paid for. And, and the fear of it becoming an unfunded mandate and saying, you will provide pre-K. And, that could mean having to rehab a building or, do all, there's the physical cost plus the cost of providing the program. And what if it's a situation where there are 4 kids who can't find capacity? Does the school system have to create a whole new pre-K program or convert a classroom or put in, little bathrooms, all that? So I think the concern for me is that without even having the funding decided yet, we're already sort of putting in statute this potentially burdensome requirement.
so I'd like to respond to that just a little bit. I guess it's comes down to a value statement of whether we consider pre-K part of the education system or not. And all of our witnesses were very clear that it is. And it seems less clear here. Because we wouldn't be saying that same thing if we needed more or less for 3rd graders or people who are in high school. If we're going to say that pre-K is public education, then it needs to have the same validity and the same expectation that students be able to access it. And that seems to be in question.
I guess what's in question is how it's probably paid for. And,
Right.
and in an era where we are trying to not add cost to the education fund, this potentially adds cost to the education fund. Philosophically, I'm not sure I could possibly disagree with you, although we provide it in a very different way than we provide public education. But it's more of not having a funding mechanism to pay for this before we put it in statute as a mandate.
Well, which is why we asked in the study for them to consider that cost.
Yeah.
And, JFO felt like they did not have sufficient information on which to make an estimate or determination. And so they suggested using the contractor with which I think they just signed a contract with. And they are in discussions with them to potentially add this work if this makes it through. And
Yeah. So to me, I think if you could sort of have a study that says this is what it would cost to meet the need, and here's how we're going to fund it, then I'd be more comfortable with requiring it. Go ahead.
And a question,
Wendy?
the question I have related to this is how this intersects with our current statutes around compulsory attendance Pre-K is not required. Parents do not have to send their child to pre-K. They may choose to or not to, but the school district must provide it. So I wonder how that intersects with what our current laws are about who is required to
Kindergarten.
go.
I mean, kindergarten's not required either.
So you would treat it the same
You would
way.
treat it You treat it the same
Same way
way.
as kindergarten, because
Yeah.
kindergarten is not required, so it would be the same.
Is every school district required to provide kindergarten? Or not?
I think I just
But they
want to
do.
make a couple of points
Don't.
about the, you know, the unfunded mandate that Chair, you mentioned. I think it's really important to highlight the importance of the partnerships in this space. So I think I don't think of this as the school district like creating a space in their building for maybe 4 or 5, 3 to 4-year-olds or 3 to 5-year-olds. I look at it as there's parts of the state where regional coordination is working really, really well in ensuring that these private partnerships exist and work well. And there's districts or regions in the state where different school districts kind of chip in a little bit of money to have a pre-K coordinator that will work with families, private providers, and the school district to ensure that there is the need, whatever it is met. So bringing all those together, so I'm not seeing it as something that the school district has to build something, create a space for this age group. I think it's more about collaboration, partnership with those private providers, which we have really robustly supported through Act 76, right? So let's utilize that investment to ensure more access for this age group that doesn't exist right now.
So we don't then need to mandate that the school provide the program.
Like, I think that it's real, I'm trying to find the language because we were very.
Page 6.
Thank you. We were very intentional about the yeah, that's not the one I'm thinking about. Okay, so yeah, on page 7, paragraph 4, I'm just speaking to the partnerships that Representative Garofano was just speaking to. We really looked at the if nobody has responsibility, then we're not going to see whether or not school districts already have responsibility for child finding from age 3 up. So they know who's in the community, or they're attempting to know who's in the community. And so this really says that they work in collaboration with if they have pre-K coordinators in the district or area districts, with AOE, with Human Services, and the local Building Bright Futures Council, to really look what are the options for making sure that we can have access in our communities for the children and the families who want to access pre-K. So I think that maybe 4 should be number 3 and 3 should be number 4, but that's the activity we want to ensure that happens. That is happening, I guess I would say, a little bit haphazardly now. It happens in some places and it doesn't in others. And so, and in the places where it is happening, they're doing a pretty decent job of ensuring access. And the places where it's not happening, we can see the results, which is why we have differences in access around the state.
You know, if you look at the bottom of paragraph 4 there, the final sentence, it's fairly clear.
If necessary.
What it sounds like is that you're suggesting that school districts maybe create a position, and that position would coordinate this effort of making sure that 3 and 4-year-olds have a place to go pre-K. And we're doing this at a time where budgets are being cut, positions are being cut now. So it's difficult to think about how do you add this pre-K coordinator position to your staff when you're cutting programs and people from your community, your learning community as of this.
Yeah, we understood. We live in all the same communities that you all are living in where people are struggling with their budgets. And it's why we didn't require it. I can tell you there were some folks on our committee who wanted to require it. It's not required. It says if any. It's recommended because we have seen in Addison County, for instance, that's a place where it's working pretty well with
And it's multiple school districts. It's not each
Right.
individual school
Right.
district that has a position. It's more on a regional basis because when you're partnering with private programs, you're looking at it on a regional, from a regional lens. So in Addison County, as Chair Wood mentioned, several school districts kind of pool resources together to ensure a position exists. And I think short of that, other collaboration can be done with the other already funded groups, such as BDF, Regional Council. But to kind of our committee's perspective is right now, responsibility doesn't live anywhere for access for this group.
I would say, you're absolutely right. There's no guarantee for that 4-year-olds are going to have access to pre-K because we don't mandate that school districts have programs and we don't mandate that private child care centers provide a pre-K program. This only mandates that public schools have a program if the need is there. So it's challenging, Representative Brown, in this time that we are in to talk about adding funded mandates. Or not even knowing what the funding is. Maybe they are funded, but maybe we should wait till we know that.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, like I really struggle with this section as well, because I think although there is some flexibility in the language, there are certain things that we sort of already know. Like we know that the supply is insufficient to meet demand in some parts of the state. And we know that not all districts can afford to fund a position for a pre-kindergarten coordinator. So like the bottom line is that the responsibility falls back on the school district at a really difficult time when the funding future is really uncertain and there are a lot of work that we need to do around the foundation formula. So it seems like I think we all share the values and the goals, but it's a really tough time to put that weight on the public school system.
And I think the only thing that I would say, I don't disagree with things that you're saying. I'm just, if we don't state what the goal is or what the expectation is, how are we going to develop a funding system that's going to meet that?
I would say that you put that in the instructions of the study that's going to recommend a funding system before mandating it would be my answer. Representative Long?
So I didn't share this with the committee earlier, but I'll just give an example. In my region, which I was surprised to see Wyndham and Windsor County are really high. And I shouldn't say I was surprised, I was happy to see, and not surprised. But yet in my area right now, we have a long-term relationship with a private provider, childcare center that has been, and because it's been so strong between the school and in one community between the school and the private provider, there's been no need to have a public pre-K in the school. But there's been talk in the last few years of this private provider not going to be able to stay open. So we were very worried because all of these children go to this private provider. Where are they going to go? And there was nowhere else because the town next door, theirs closed. So we started looking into the costs of creating a public program in our school to take those children, because those children were going from the child care center immediately into the school. So the costs were really undoable. We haven't done it yet, but we're still trying in case they close. We're kind of hoping they don't close, but we don't have a playground that adequately meets. We don't have a teacher. So we've already got a teacher trying to get licensed in case this does happen. There's requirements for restrooms. You know all the requirements much better than I do, but bathrooms and all that. And it got to be so overwhelming in a district where we're losing enrollment anyway. And so we've kind of put it all to the back burner. I'm just giving it as an example of the cost, even outside of, staffing and all of that, or even a coordinator position. That really feel overwhelmed for districts right now. And so I just give it as an example.
And in one of my school districts, they're actually moving in that direction already. And I don't know if your committee would be surprised to learn that 19 school districts around the state already combine CCFAP funds with pre-K funds to offer full day of services. And I know both in my school district, actually, Mount Mansfield and Harvard are both looking at that for this coming school year to be able to try to meet that. And so I think it's important to recognize on the private side of things, there's, probably similar concerns, only not in that same way, because as public schools actually expand their opportunity for kids to have pre-K in the public school by partnering up with CCFAP so that parents are not left with the struggle of what do I do after the 2 hours a day or 3 hours a day or whatever the local schedule is. Then I have to come pick up my child and take them someplace else if I'm working or, so that's why these school districts are looking to partner with CCFAP to create a full day. And, frankly, I think that has some private providers worried because that's going, people will be interested in that, I'm sure, that opportunity. But, for instance, that in one of the towns that I represent, Huntington, they're kind of out in the little bit of middle of nowhere. They're kind of a distance away from Richmond and they're a distance away from Heinsberg. And so, their little school is looking at, having full-time programs, part of it being pre-K and part of it being, childcare funded by CCFAP. So the sort of money part is going in more directions, and it wouldn't surprise me to see more school districts actually doing that. Those are the only two, and that's just in my district. I don't know if other people are familiar with what's happening in theirs.
Tomorrow, we're going to have testimony from superintendents, and, we're going to hear about the challenges. I think one in particular will be North Country, which is, right up on the Canadian border. And I suspect they're going to say, we don't have the private providers out there. And this is going to be, for us, a very large unfunded mandate, because we will have to take on all that at a time when we don't even know what the funding, because the study hasn't been done or anything, we don't know what the funding system's going to be.
Yeah. And I get that. We were not intending, honestly, our committee is not intending on applying an unfunded mandate. I don't want to go into any more school meetings already and hear about any more unfunded mandates, trust me, any more than any of the rest of you do. So that is not the intent. Our intent was to make sure that it was included in the cost of education and in whatever payment mechanism is established and whatever rate is established in a foundation formula, or whether Ways and Means had asked us to think about I would say the wrong word, categorical aid. And we just really determined we had insufficient information on which to make a determination of one over the other for this. And JFO really felt like they didn't have sufficient information to do that either. And so hence the last section, yeah.
I think that maybe we could work on language that would say, would make the study a little more specific to how do we fund areas that don't have capacity. But I know I appreciate you saying that your intention is not to create an unfunded mandate. But when it says, if necessary, a school district shall begin or expand a program to meet that demand, that is a mandate.
Well, it is, but I also want to point out that none of those sections go into effect until the whatever new funding formula goes into effect. So that the concept is that it would be included in the cost of education so that it wouldn't be an unfunded mandate.
I guess that would be my sort of cart before the horse.
Just want to also add, we heard testimony from First Children's Finance about capacity building in early ed that's been happening through kind of Act 76 and even before that, but really a lot more of it. And all the capacity building that has happened since Act 76 has passed, every childcare program that has opened has had UPK preschool slots in it. So in areas of the state where there are no private programs, I think there are a lot of opportunities. And I know I work for the department and work in that division. I know the Child Development Division and DCF in collaboration with AOE and BBF and other partners have had a concerted effort looking at data to understand where are the gaps. There was just a report that came out for a supply and demand study to understand where are the gaps in programs across the state and private programs. So just trying to make the point that where those gaps exist, there is a lot of resources to create private programs that will partner with the school district in these areas, which is probably a lot more financially easier way of going about it than having a school build a brick and mortar UPK within their existing infrastructure. So just want to make that point that there's a lot of resources and there's a lot of work being done. And I think our point was to really shore up the collaboration and communication between all the parties, and having the school districts be kind of responsible for that would ensure that they're collaborating and partnering with the right stakeholders to ensure that is happening.
Yeah, I don't think that that's the objection. That I think everybody wants to see collaboration and more resources and more sort of capacity building, as you say. Yeah. Any other questions, Representative McCann?
Just add that I would love for every elementary school to offer pre-K. But it needs to be funded in such a way that pre-K kids count as a full kid. With the weights now, it's well underfunded. And when we move forward with the foundation formula, we need to figure out how to get it right so that we can move those programs into our schools. We have a capacity in many schools because of the declining enrollment. So let's, get it done, but it's going to cost money to figure out where that comes from.
I realize we're keeping you longer than we intended. So I think the other concern that we're going to hear is the requirement here that it's the provisional or emergency licenses in settings where the superintendent, who's ultimately responsible for that teacher, has no supervision capacity that was in a private pre-K setting. And I just wanted to know if you could speak to that a little bit.
We wanted to assure, since we were putting in place a requirement for licensure, that there be the same opportunity for licensed pre-K educators that exist, that any other licensed pre-K educator would have. And so I know I'm, falling back on my own school district examples too, but I do know that it, in previous practice, that actually has occurred and has changed, and we wanted to reinstate it.
Can you tell me who would have liability of it's the superintendent who kind of signs off on the provisional license. Person is placed in a private pre-K, or is working in a private pre-K doing their job, commits some infraction that might end up with a lawsuit or whatever. I think there's a concern about who has the liability here.
Yeah, I can't answer. I'm not a lawyer. I can't answer that question. I mean, it's generally an employer who has the liability, but I don't feel qualified to answer that question.
And I'll just reiterate that that practice has been normal practice for early ed side where provisional licensure was possible through supervision of the school district until very recently. So that is not something new that we're introducing. That's been practice.
Representative Brady?
But my understanding, I think that might be a practice in some places of just sort of something that has evolved on the ground, but that is not in statute anywhere as a.
Any further questions from the committee? So I think, brought together with you our concerns. Appreciate you coming back to us with some of the thoughts from the committee. If you have any thoughts on if there's a middle ground here that might work, would be open to them. But I think what you're hearing among this committee is a lot of concern over that, especially that one, almost just that one sentence that is a mandate and is a mandate before the funding of that mandate is even known. And I think that if we can perhaps make the study a little clearer about that and put off the mandate, it's going to make many of the people on this committee more comfortable with it. So any thoughts or suggestions you might have, feel free to pass them along.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to share our committee's thinking and the really hours of testimony that we took on trying to formulate something that was going to provide increased access to Vermonters and more equitable access. One thing that we left on the table, frankly, was not something we were able to come to any kind of conclusion about because of insufficient data, and that's there's wide variability right now from 0 hours of pre-K to full-time pre-K. And it's just what you get passed in your budget. And what your school district presents to the voters and they approve or not. So we were not able to tackle that. That's a big equity issue as well. And because AOE doesn't really have data yet, although it is in process of really understanding where in the state and how many hours and, all of that kind of stuff. We have numbers of students, but it doesn't really tell us the deeper picture. And that's a giant equity issue, which is really how we started to learn about this in taking testimony around Act 76, learning that it was such a wide disparity. And that is, I don't need to tell you folks, you do public education every day.
No,
You have that kind of disparity in public education.
You're absolutely right. It's very hard to sort of understand the picture because, the district that I represent really doesn't look good in terms of offering pre-K. But in fact, there's a lot of private capacity, which is where it's.
You have all the data by school district.
Yeah.
Now, and actually they show the total. So I don't know if you had an opportunity to look at the data that was provided to our committee, which maybe you're getting as well, but
Well, that's our other issue is that we've got a clock ticking behind us that is so loud, it's deafening.
yeah.
So we are having to move very quickly.
Yeah, yeah. So if you looked at, we didn't really get much from AOE.
It's the media.
The BBF
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
First Children's Finance. Those two pieces of information had a lot more data that would be helpful. That was sort of like hot off the presses kind of stuff. All right, thanks.
Very much.
Thank you.
Look at our agenda, see what it actually says.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Yeah, that is good.
yes. I think we might stay on the topic for a minute and invite legislative counsel. So if folks could stay on this same topic. We will have testimony tomorrow, which may have an impact on the way people are thinking. I am wondering if it is possible.
Oh, yeah, can I?
Yeah, talk, please.
I mean, it's just the frustration, I think, of our whole legislative process here, but yeah. If I could accomplish two things as a legislature, one would be truly universal full-time public pre-K and better post-secondary supports for kids. And well aware we're not going to do either one of those things this year or probably God knows when. But I guess it's to say that, like, it feels crummy to have to tell your colleagues in another committee that here's a big substantive bill and we're interested in some of it. We share some of the values, but we can't, but I can't, I don't feel like we could possibly do this justice and do good policy work on this in, you know, the constraints and that we're in this tight, like the pieces of Act 73 or the goals of Act 73. Like, I feel like we have to stick to that this week. Again, and it's frustrating and I feel 10 different layers of guilt because it does not align with my values or priorities, but I just think it's the reality of where we are in this incredibly compressed timeline and process and, you know, trying to really overhaul pre-K and the entire school district system and create CSAs and CTE and we are just, and we have, I will say again, the easy part. We get to sit here, feel stressed about it, read 100 text messages from people telling us to do different things, but it's the people in the field who have to work that have the hard jobs. And so I feel unprepared to do good policy work on pre-K in a couple hour snippets in 36 hours. And so I am interested in, to be constructive, what is the sort of minimal pieces in terms of understanding the funding as we continue to contemplate much bigger funding changes that we can move that piece along. And this stays on a very important, you know, list of ongoing work that we need to get to.
So when we,
That's my take.
when we were all here last talking about this, a couple days ago, or maybe it was a few hours ago, we gave legislative council some instructions, and maybe we should go through that language if it's ready.
Sure, Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. It's not very exciting.
No, I know. And so this would be to answer Representative Brady's thoughts. What is, you know, what sort of, how can we move things along? But set aside maybe some of the bigger issues that we find ourselves unable to spend enough time on to get through. Although I feel pretty strongly about a mandate before a funding proposal is put before us.
So you have on your website draft 8.1 of drafting request 26-0802, which is the pre-K language that came over from Human Services. Until you make any decisions about what you're adding to your own committee bill, we're just going to work in this document. And so the changes are to section 4. Section 4 begins on page 4 at the very bottom. And I will just note that section 4 does not take effect until the foundation formula takes effect. And the changes between draft 7.1 or 7.3 and draft 8.1, so between this morning and now, are on page 6 in subdivision B 3 and 4, just reverting back to current law.
I'm actually going to have us go back to page 5 if you don't mind. And maybe you should share your screen. if we want to talk about what's in here,
Where would you like to start? Where should?
maybe I'm going to go through and people, you can stop me if I have it wrong. So on page 2, line 12, we will hear testimony about this. The main issue, line 12, reading that whole paragraph, is the part after the comment that says, including the issuance of provisional and emergency licenses. So we don't need to decide on this tonight. We'll hear more tomorrow, but just to say that the concern will be that if you have somebody with an emergency license or provisional license in a private setting, who ultimately has responsibility, because the license is signed off on by the superintendent, but really has no supervision of that person. So it's kind of a liability question, who has the liability.
And if there is a licensed teacher, even before that, even without this language in here, with the issuance of provisional emergency license, isn't it the same thing even without that language? As long as there's a licensed teacher, there needs to be someone that person could be hired under provisional, because you can do that in any.
If they meet all of the requirements to obtain a provisional or emergency license.
I think the difference here is that a private pre-K that hires a licensed teacher does that separate and apart from the superintendent. Whereas somebody with a provisional emergency license has got the backing of the superintendent.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying, I don't see why I'm adding in that doesn't preclude the problem. It's there anyway.
From a liability point of view, if somebody is licensed and hired separate and apart from anything to do with the school district, the school district doesn't have any liability tied to that person. I would think. I'm no lawyer, but when it's got
clarity around that, that's all.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not quite sure how we get clarity around it. So anyway, that's the issue on that section. The page 3 is the NEK choice issue. Match language has been worked out by everybody. I don't. Somebody tell me if they have any issue with that. We're going to need to. It's also in a separate bill coming over from the Senate, which I think has passed already out of the Senate.
On third reading tomorrow.
That's the same one.
Page 5, the substantive change here is adding a child who is 5 years of age, who is eligible for kindergarten, but is not developmentally ready. Still qualifying for pre-K. We don't currently have that language. Is that right?
So right now, that is true. The language that is underlined is not current law, but the way it is written now is 3 or 4 years old or is 5 years of age, but is not yet enrolled in kindergarten. I think it's potentially just, if you're just looking at this piece of law, it's potentially ambiguous as to whether you get pre-K funding under this for 3 years or 2 years. The change here makes it not ambiguous, that it's eligible for enrollment, with the exception of kiddos who are not developmentally ready for pre-K.
So that's like that. Sure. Okay. So why don't you take over at page 6? We're highlighting current law, right?
Yes, I'm only highlighting current law. This is where the provisions about having the pre-K coordinator and being responsible for assisting families to find programs with capacity lived in subdivision 3, that's gone. And then subdivision 4 is where you have the language about the consultation between AOE, Human Services, Building Bright Futures, and the school district, potentially resulting in a school district being required to expand or begin a pre-K program, and that language has been removed. So just reverting back to current law and subdivisions 3 and 4. And I didn't make any other changes to what came over to you from Human Services.
So the page 8, line 13, that makes it clear. That a public school or a private provider could sort of move out of official pre-K into childcare and receive payments directly from parents or from CCFAC. If there's any discussion on that, it certainly,
School districts get the 10 hours worth of money
they gotta wait.
and then they pay it out to private providers.
They pay out a voucher to private providers that is set annually. Yeah, you heard the comparison from them about the weight versus what's paid out, and that if you sort of were to convert it all into dollars, they aren't the same. That's true.
They're paying out more than they're taking in.
No,
No, the opposite.
the opposite. In other words, they get the
Depending on what they're providing.
Correct.
right. If they're so if you are not providing any public pre-K, all you're doing is paying vouchers out. For each one of those students, that weight is 0.46, so call it half a kid. The value of that is half of the average, per pupil weight. But they're paying out like $3,500 in pre-K tuition.
But if you're providing pre-K
Right.
in a school.
If you're providing a full day of pre-K, you're still only getting 0.46. Yeah, which is why I think the study is obviously not controversial.
This is a tangent, I think, I don't know if there's evidence of. I don't know, somewhat from my son's own experience, like. Often pre-K students with special needs are served. In. Maybe I need data to back that up, but I guess I know anecdotally around my area, often in the public. School programs, like they first fill all the spots with the students who have IEP or K version of that is when you're. Yes, the triple E, and like that's what the child find is for, like, so they tend to, those. I guess it's just anecdotal, so I'm gonna just stop right there.
Well, I think that.
I need further data to
There is
explain my statement.
mandated services for 3 and 4 year olds through Triple E.
And it's important, the earlier you identify.
Oh, so important. Yeah, so it's, yeah,
Yeah, and this isn't talking about changing anything.
yeah, never mind.
All right. Quick roundtable. Where are people? I've made a lot of talk about mandates. Who disagrees with me, at least statewide? Or should we keep the mandate that they're proposing in this language?
Can I say something kind of different about
You
it?
can say anything you want, as long as I don't have to talk first.
It starts.
If we did, and I've already talked to Representative Wood about this, if we did pass out this bill, is this a bill that we could also tack something else on that would equalize the pre-K and the post pre-K, I guess the regular K-8 experience on?
Say that again.
So if we did pass out this bill, is it a bill that we could?
This would be language we would add to our.
Goes in our.
So like,
This-
I had, just didn't get into this, and she said she could have, but she didn't. This quick bill that I did about epinephrine, they can't keep it in stock pre-K. And it's really important, like kids have died. I've received messages from parents whose kids have died. And she said that could be tacked onto this, since it would now be part of the K-8 system to say, yes.
That may have been being handled in healthcare. I'm not
It
sure.
was assigned to them and she was like, oh, I could have put it on the pre-K, but we didn't use, your team could do that.
I would say that that would be sort of not totally germane, but we will probably get the miscellaneous ed bill back from the side.
Okay, all right, I'll wait till then, thanks.
Yes. President Brown.
I was just gonna say that in this version that we're looking at with Beth, seeing the current law status of sections 3 and 4 as contrasted with the bill that
You've
came
done a
over from,
subsection.
yes, I forget, I'm looking back for the page. So it's the draft that we're looking at right now, page 6 of 13, sections 3 and 4, compared to, I don't know where it is, the human services bill. Anyways, I think that just really, I mean, there's a clear legal difference there, and I think it just only confirms my concerns around the issue that you raised about how this doesn't create additional significant responsibilities for public schools.
I am much more comfortable with what we have now for freaking 4 compared to what was there. I have another concern. I don't know if it rises to the top of having to do anything about it. But the current system, the private provider has to hire a licensed teacher. And this changes it to that's the person that has to be providing it. And I know there's a 7-year on-ramp. But even their own data is not showing there's a significant difference in quality between the private and the public. So is that a requirement that might reduce access to pre-K in our rural regions that are really relying on the private providers to provide that? And there's the 7-year on-ramp, and it's contingent on foundation formula. But I do want to mention that that has been brought to my attention by providers in my area when the licensing came up a year ago.
I think that.
I'm just
it
concerned
is-
about it.
Yeah, I think it should stay there because it's so far in the
Yeah,
future.
I'm okay.
And it's also part of the, they're also proposing as part of the study,
Yeah.
equity in funding. So if you're going to say, we're going to pay private providers more, we're going to couple that with the expectation of that the kids are being taught by the licensed teacher. So we'll get some testimony tomorrow, but are people uncomfortable with the changes that we have made? And again, I just want to emphasize, I don't disagree with that philosophy whatsoever. It just seems to me that we should understand how we're going to pay for that mandate before we put the mandate in statute.
Yeah.
I think, I could not agree more that if we're going to call 4-year-olds students, and that we should make sure that they're all having access to pre-K, such as it is. Yeah.
I think it's also to remember, I realize this is really hard when we have no money yet, but in the very long game, it's really important to get this early education in, and it's gonna save us hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in the future to have an educated populace and a populace with strong early literacy.
Really encouraging to hear the statistic that 91% of kids are coming to school ready. I don't know if that was
85.
85%, but is that just the
Something like
ones who paid for pre-K?
What if it was 100?
No, but we're clearly headed in the right direction.
And there's a lot of difference in our data.
Yeah.
Some do a 3-year and 4-year, some just do 4, some have 10 hours, some have 30 hours.
I would also say
The
that,
data is really incomplete.
I'd also say that there are people who don't do pre-K at all,
Correct.
but do high quality childcare and of course they show up ready. Anybody else want to weigh in on this? We'll sort of sit on it, get our testimony tomorrow, check in again, and have further discussion. Sound like a plan? All right. We'll wrap this part of our show. As you see me stare into the middle distance, it is an indication that I'm not functioning very well. And I was going to, We need to, be really ready again tomorrow if we're to hit the ground running. Be prepared to stay tomorrow. To get work done. We may have a list of school districts to go within a CISA map,
Okay.
which you could be able to plug in. I think
When?
that we may have that first thing tomorrow.
Okay.
We are trying to work on money to fund things. We probably in the overnight hours, we'll get some more research done on that. So we can plug in some numbers there. Off the top of your head, what are some of the other outstanding major? We have to shore up our district guide map.
Just looking for green. So it's not highlighted in green, but section 4 on page 13 is the CISA grant program. So thinking about whether you're going to amend that in any way, and how does that work with the appropriations at the very end of the bill? How many facilitators you want to require VTLC to hire? Or how are you giving that direction to them, whether it's a number or a range or guidance there? And then you've already noted the guidance map. And in addition to the amounts of money, all of your appropriations, you would need to think about the source of the money. And in some of them, who the appropriation is to. So the CISA startup grant. How that works with what you currently have on the books, I think just requires a little bit of thought.
Yeah.
But I think those are the only places that I have flagged as needing as policy choices that you have not yet arrived at enough of a consensus to keep moving forward with draft language. Not that everything in here that is not highlighted is the consensus.
All right, I know some people have meetings to get to later on this afternoon, so are people comfortable breaking now?
Everyone's already broken.
All right, we are back in here at 9 tomorrow. Thank you all. It was actually